I'm in the shop today and I thought I'd show you how I set up a drum kit for performance. And there's a lot of nuance involved in this situation. I mean, obviously we're all different sizes. We have different size kits, we're different heights. But there are some fundamentals that I think are important to understand when it comes to setting up for ergonomics and for tone. And those are the two key things that I want you to keep in mind as you watch through this video. We want to be able to play with as much ease and as little discomfort as possible, and we want to be able to get the best tone we can out of our drums. That being said, I've got another drum kit right in front of me behind the camera. Let's start setting up. I always start with my bass drum first because firstly it's the biggest, heaviest drum, so once it's down I don't want to have to move it again. Secondly, it kind of determines where exactly the whole kit is going to be and the direction that I as the drummer am going to be facing. And typically drums get put in the middle of the stage at the back, slightly raised up. That's your sort of convention. These days sometimes drums get put off to one side, but it's much more common to be in the middle of the stage. The most important reason that the bass drum gets put down first is it acts as an anchor to the rest of the drum kit. Every other drum and cymbal is going to get positioned in relation to where the bass drum is. Now the next thing I set up is my toms, and that's because I generally transport them exactly the way you see it here. I don't even take this rack arm out of the tom. Sometimes I do, but it doesn't matter because they've got these guide linkages. I'm not exactly sure what they're called, but they ensure that no matter how I set this thing up, it will always be the same. So there's a notch, I don't know if you can see that notch there, that links up with a notch there. And also this depth is tightened up so that when I put this on, and it's in place, I don't even have to tighten anything, and it's now lined up exactly how I want it lined up. So this guide makes sure that the depth remains consistent, and this movement side to side remains consistent. These ones have tightened it up. You've got a guide on this side also to make sure that this can't move like that, or it can't move in or out either. Now, I would recommend that at home you take the time to properly set up your toms and get them comfortable. You don't want them to be too low because otherwise you start hitting glancing blows and then your tone isn't as good as it could be. But you don't want them to be too vertical, otherwise it becomes uncomfortable to play them properly without hitting the rims. So it's a bit of a trade-off that you're going to have to figure out. The next item for me is the drum throne. Now, the drum throne and the snare kind of work hand in hand. The only reason I'm doing the drum throne first is because it more directly relates to the bass drum. But typically, I'm worried about the height of the drum throne and I'm worried about how close I am to the bass drum. So let's talk about the height first. I don't want my leg to be up here somewhere because now I'm fighting against gravity, right? You want it to be, if anything, slightly lower than your hip, at least for me personally. It also kind of means I can play a bit faster. I don't want to be too low though because I don't want to have to be reaching. So you want to be at the right height. Height will come back to haunt us in a bit when we start talking about snare, because snare versus hi-hat heights, that kind of matters also. But that part we'll get to in a minute. In terms of how far from the bass drum, I think where I am now feels quite comfortable. I don't want to be too close to where my knee is bashing the bass drum, because I'm losing power now on my downstroke, and also don't want to be far out because there again I'm actually losing power, so it's a balancing act. Next up I position my snare. Now my snare is positioned in between my knees. With regards to heights, you don't want the drum so high that you're putting tension on your arm, and you don't want it so low that you're playing into the floor either. One of the ways that I use to judge if it's the correct height, because this is a little bit too low for my liking personally, is can I drum like this, and can I rim shots without really having to bend over. Right, that's sort of what I try to aim for. I would prefer this ever so slightly higher, but yeah, that's basically how I set my snare. Let's move on to the hi-hats next. Next up is the hi-hat. Now, in terms of positioning, I want it to be slightly overlapping my snare. The reason being because what's comfortable, what will tend to happen after you've played a couple of songs, your arms will relax more. And if it's too far out, like if it was there, I might be able to start there, but eventually I'm going to start missing the hi-hat. So we want it to be close enough that that's not likely to happen. With regards to heights, for me personally, I essentially want this as low as I can get it without interacting with my snare stick, right? So this is about perfect. Because the snare is slightly too low, I would probably raise my hi-hat ever so slightly as well. But yeah, you don't want your hi-hats up here because of unnecessary tension here, and you don't want it too low because you'll be connecting with your snare drumstick. One other thing to point out is how do you know how high to make the top cymbal versus the bottom cymbal? The way I was taught, you want to be able to get closed, open, clear open of course, and sizzle. But honestly, it's a personal preference. I know people that will put their hi-hats even more than that. I've seen people like that, you know, where you can park a car under there. And I've seen people that barely have it open at all, where they don't get it. It's either closed or sizzle. That's entirely up to you. Alright, next up is my floor tom. Now, I have this floor tom tucked in a little bit personally. My snare, you will notice, the shape of this kit, snare toms and floor tom, is kind of almost like an L shape, just the way it ends up working. But this floor tom is tucked in a bit because I don't want to be twisting all the way back here to reach this, because I do tend to use my floor tom quite a lot with triplets. You know? Height-wise, I don't know, pretty much the same as the snare, although no, actually slightly higher because when you're twisting like this, it's more difficult to get down, so you want to be slightly higher. Also, I like to be closer to this tom for fast movement like that also. I do like to tip my floor tom in a bit. This is a little bit straight for my liking. I would prefer to have it slightly more angled, again, because you know when you're reaching like this, it's not easy to play straight, it's easier to play a little slight angle. Now the final piece of the puzzle is cymbals. Now I'm at this drum kit instead of the one at the shop because we've got a severe lack of cymbals at the shop, and it is a problem I'm trying to sort out at the moment. But cymbals, I'm doing this as their own category as opposed to separating crashes and rounds and stuff because it's just easier that way. But also, cymbals are by far the most preferential. Really, you're just going to have to sit and fiddle around and see where you want them, or the most comfortable positions. That being said, there are two things I can talk about when it comes to cymbals. Firstly is a convention that exists. I don't know how old this convention is or who invented it, but that convention is essentially from left to right. You go smallest cymbal to biggest cymbal, or highest pitch to lowest pitch. That's why you've got a crash right by the hi-hats, and you've got your two crashes. So it's a splash, not a crash. Two crashes, and then a ride. The hi-hat is, of course, the exception. The other thing I could talk about is the difference between crashes and rides. Rides are, because it's a cymbal that you're going to be sitting on the whole time, you know, like it'll take the place of your hi-hat, for instance. Your ride, you typically want in a much more comfortable place. So typically rides are a bit lower down, not like this one is, and typically leaning over the kits a bit, so that you can easily reach, you know, the tip, the middle, and the bell portion. Just makes life easier, because you know, if the ride is too high, now my arm's up here and I'm actually putting strain on my back. If it's too far out or too far back, I'm putting strain on my shoulder. You know, it's more important that it's in a comfortable position. Whereas your crashes, you can afford for them to be a little bit out of the way because their punctuation is the way that I like to think of them. You're going to play them at the end of a verse, end of a chorus, or at the end of a phrase. Crashes also will typically have a variety of stands that get used because, I mean, oftentimes you're wanting to put a crash there and maybe up there somewhere. So you need different kinds of stands. Whereas rides, we typically stick to the boom stands. Right, now the discussion that we've had is for essentially a conventional drum kit, a standard 5-piece kit. I've left out a lot because of time and because of really, this was meant to be a basic conversation that you can then use as a sort of a foundational thing. If you want to add extra things in, I mean, you get all sorts of cymbals, inverted cymbals, China cymbals, bell cymbals, stacked cymbals. If you want to add a second bass drum in, or another floor tom, or another snare, if you want to add a tambourine on top of your hi-hat, if you want to add a cowbell, so all these different things, gongs and big things that you can add if you want to, extra rack toms even. At least you've got the fundamental knowledge and basic understanding of why things are positioned where they are positioned. But again, like I said at the start, it is a personal preference thing, so feel free to change things around, experiment. I highly recommend that. If this video has been helpful to you, please do let me know down below in the comments, and not just for the sake of YouTube, but also because as a content creator, it's good to know when my work is helping people out there. That being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.